The moment you stop explaining yourself, someone calls you selfish. The moment you stop overgiving, someone feels abandoned, and you sit there wondering, did I lose my kindness, or did I finally stop disappearing? Because here's the truth no one tells you. People don't get angry when you hurt them. If you've ever felt guilty for choosing yourself, this isn't about being selfish. It's about waking up. You weren't called selfish when you stayed up late fixing things that weren't your responsibility. You weren't called selfish when you kept forgiving, explaining, shrinking, adjusting. You were called selfish the moment you stopped. And I know exactly how that feels, because when you finally say no, it doesn't feel empowering at first. It feels wrong, heavy, like you've broken some unspoken rule you didn't even remember agreeing to. You start replaying the moment in your head. Did I say it too harshly? Should I have explained more? Am I becoming someone I don't like? And here's the painful part no one warns you about. The guilt doesn't come from doing something bad. It comes from doing something new. Think about it. For years, you trained people how to treat you by overgiving. You answered quickly. You made space even when you had none. You chose harmony over honesty. So when you finally choose yourself, the system shakes. And suddenly, you're not kind anymore. You're cold. You're not understanding. You're distant. You're not helpful. You're selfish. But let me tell you something that might change how you see this forever. Selfishness is about taking while knowing it harms others. Self-love is about stopping the harm you've been doing to yourself. Those two things are not the same. They just feel the same to people who benefited from your silence. I want you to think about a moment. The first time you didn't reply right away. The first time you said, I can't do this right now. The first time you chose rest over proving your worth. Notice what happened next. Did the world fall apart? Or did someone simply feel uncomfortable because they lost access to you? Because that discomfort, theirs and yours, is where the confusion begins. You were never taught how to choose yourself without feeling like a villain. Most of us weren't. We were taught that love means availability, that kindness means sacrifice, that being good means being needed. So when you stop being endlessly available, your nervous system panics. It says, careful, you might lose love. And your mind translates that fear into guilt. I remember reading a study that explained this beautifully. The brain doesn't distinguish well between physical danger and emotional rejection. 2. Your nervous system, setting a boundary, can feel like stepping off a cliff, even when it's actually building a bridge back to yourself. That's why this feels so intense. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're breaking an old survival pattern. You didn't become selfish. You became aware that saying yes when you mean no is a form of self-betrayal. Aware that constantly explaining yourself is a form of fear. Aware that love that requires you to disappear isn't love. It's a transaction. And here's the truth. Most people won't say out loud. The people who react the strongest to your boundaries are often the ones who are most comfortable with you having none. That doesn't make them evil. It makes them human. But it also doesn't make you wrong. You're not selfish for choosing peace over performance. You're not selfish for resting without earning it. You're not selfish for changing. You're just practicing something you were never taught how to do without shame. And once you understand that, everything else starts to shift. I want you to look at this from a quieter angle for a moment. not from what people say about you now, but from what ancient wisdom has always known about balance. There's an old idea in Eastern philosophy that says suffering begins when we confuse attachment with love. Attachment says, I need you to be a certain way so I feel okay. Love says, I want you well, even if that means I'm uncomfortable. Think about how rarely we're taught that distinction. Most of us grew up believing love meant endurance, staying, tolerating, proving. So when you stop enduring what hurts you, it feels like betrayal, not of others, but of the version of you that survived by being agreeable. A monk once described it like this. He said the mind is like a lamp in a windy room. If you don't shield the flame, the wind doesn't thank you for the light. It simply puts it out. Protecting the flame was never selfish. It was the only way the light survived. I remember reading a study that connected this idea to something modern psychology calls attachment threat. When you change your behavior, when you stop over-functioning, the people around you experience a loss of predictability. Their brain reads that loss as danger, and instead of saying, I feel scared, they say, you've changed. That's why accusations feel so personal. You're selfish. You don't care anymore. You've become distant. But those words are often a protest, not a diagnosis. A protest against losing access to the version of you that made everything easier for them. Here's the part I need you to hear slowly. Discomfort is not the same as damage. Someone feeling uncomfortable with your boundaries does not mean you've harmed them. Think about it this way. If you've always bent, the moment you stand upright feels like a push to someone leaning on you. Not because you shoved them, but because they were never supporting themselves. And your body knows this before your mind does. That tight feeling in your chest after you say, no, the urge to over-explain, the sudden desire to make it okay. Those are nervous system reflexes from years of self-abandonment, not proof that you're unkind. You weren't selfish back then. You were afraid of losing connection. Now, you're learning something braver. That real connection doesn't require constant self-erasure. That love doesn't need you exhausted to be valid. That being needed is not the same as being valued. And yes, this part can feel lonely, because when you stop performing, the room gets quieter. Some relationships adjust, some fade, some reveal that they were built more on access than affection. That grief is real. It deserves space. But so does the relief you feel when you no longer betray yourself to keep the peace. You are not becoming less loving. You are becoming more honest. And honesty always feels like distance to people who are benefiting from your silence. This is not the end of your kindness. It's the beginning of it having boundaries. Now, let's bring this out of theory and into your real life, because understanding this isn't enough if you don't know how to live it. The first shift is internal, not external. You don't start by changing your behavior. You start by changing the story you tell yourself after you set a boundary. I remember reading a study on self-concept clarity that showed something powerful. People who struggle with guilt after saying no aren't confused about their values. They're confused about their worth. Their mind still believes love is something they earn through usefulness. So the moment you choose yourself, your inner voice panics and says, you're taking too much. You're being unfair. You should give more. That voice isn't your conscience. It's conditioning. The practice here is simple, but uncomfortable. After you set a boundary, don't rush to justify it. Don't explain it 5 different ways. Don't emotionally chase people back into comfort. Sit in the silence long enough for your nervous system to learn something new. That you can disappoint someone and still be safe. That love doesn't disappear the moment you stop overgiving. The second shift is learning to expect resistance without interpreting it as failure. Think about it this way. If you've always been the flexible one, your change forces others to adjust. Adjustment feels like loss before it feels like balance. I remember reading research on habit disruption in relationships. When one person changes a long-standing role, the system pushes back. Not because the change is wrong, but because the system is used to stability, even unhealthy stability. So when someone reacts, withdraws, or accuses you, pause before you absorb it. Ask yourself one honest question. Is this reaction about my behavior or about their discomfort with change? That question alone can save you years of unnecessary self-doubt. The third shift is the hardest, and it's where self-love becomes real. You have to choose peace over approval. This doesn't mean you become cold or careless. It means you stop negotiating your well-being for reassurance. Notice how often your yes comes from fear. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being replaced. Fear of being seen as difficult. Self-love asks a different question. Is this aligned with who I am becoming? Or am I acting from an old wound at first? Choosing alignment feels like loneliness, because approval used to be your proof of belonging. But slowly, something else happens. Your body relaxes. Your resentment fades. Your relationships either recalibrate or reveal their limits. And here's the truth. I wish someone had told you sooner. If a relationship only survives when you abandon yourself, its collapse is not a loss. It's a release. You are not responsible for maintaining bonds that require your self-betrayal. You are responsible for living in integrity with yourself. That's the difference between selfishness and self-love. Selfishness protects ego. Self-love protects wholeness. And the more whole you become, the less you need to explain why you chose yourself. Because the people meant to walk with you won't need you to disappear in order to stay. I know this part can feel unsettling, because once you start choosing yourself, you can't unsee what you were doing before. You start noticing how often your yes was a reflex, how often your silence was a strategy, how often your kindness was actually fear, wearing a softer name. And this is where the deepest confusion shows up. You begin to wonder, if I stop giving like this, who am I? Because when your identity has been built around being needed, self-love feels like erasure before it feels like freedom. I remember reading a study on role identity in long-term relationships. It explained that when someone exits a caretaking role, the emotional system goes through something similar to grief. Not because love is gone, but because predictability is, and grief, when misunderstood, turns into blame. That's why some people don't say, I miss you. They say, you've changed. They don't say, I feel scared. They say, you're selfish now. But listen carefully. Change is not betrayal. It's information. It tells you where you were overextended. It tells you where love was conditional. It tells you where you were surviving, not connecting. Think about it this way. If you were always the bridge everyone crossed without learning how to swim, when you step back, they don't drown because you're cruel. They struggle because they never had to build their own strength. That doesn't make you responsible for rescuing them again. Your nervous system will still argue with this. It will pull you back toward old patterns with familiar sensations, guilt, urgency, the desire to fix things quickly. I remember reading research on trauma bonding that explained why this pull is so strong. When connection has been tied to self-sacrifice, the body mistakes exhaustion for intimacy. So when you choose rest, at first I'm bonding and like quiet, almost wrong, but that quiet is not loss. It's space. And in that space, something important begins to grow. Discernment. You start to notice who respects your no without punishment, who listens without keeping score, who doesn't need you depleted to feel secure. This is where self-love stops being an idea and becomes a filter. You don't announce it. You don't defend it. You live it. You stop over-explaining because clarity doesn't need persuasion. You stop chasing closure from people who only want access. You stop confusing intensity with intimacy. And slowly, the accusations lose their power, not because people stop saying them, but because you stop believing them. You realize something grounding. If protecting your energy makes someone uncomfortable, that discomfort is theirs to process, not yours to solve. I know you worry about becoming hard, about losing your softness, about turning into someone who doesn't care, but self-love doesn't harden you. It stabilizes you. Think about people who truly care for others in a sustainable way. They aren't available to everyone all the time. They aren't depleted. They aren't resentful. They give from fullness, not obligation. And that's the shift you're making now, even if it doesn't feel graceful yet. You're learning to pause before responding, to check your body before agreeing, to notice when something feels heavy instead of aligned. These are not selfish instincts. They are signals of self-respect forming. There will be moments when loneliness creeps in, especially when you stop filling every silence with effort, especially when fewer people have constant access to you. Let yourself feel that loneliness without immediately trying to fix it, because often what you're feeling isn't absence. It's withdrawal from emotional overuse. I remember reading that emotional burnout doesn't just come from giving too much. It comes from giving without choice. Now you're choosing. And with that choice comes a quieter kind of confidence, not loud, not defensive, just steady. You don't need to prove your goodness anymore. You don't need to earn rest. You don't need to earn rest. You don't need to justify why your needs matter. Anyon, who truly sees you, will adapt. Anyon, who can't, was attached to a version of you that costs too much to maintain. You are not selfish for stepping out of that role. You are courageous. Because self-love isn't about putting yourself above others. It's about refusing to put yourself beneath them. And once you stop living beneath yourself, you don't need permission to stay there. Before you move on with your day, I want you to sit with one final truth. Not the version that sounds comforting. The one that feels steady when everything else quiets down. You were never selfish. You were exhausted. Exhausted from carrying emotional weight that was never meant to be yours alone. Exhausted from translating your needs into something more acceptable. Exhausted from being the glue while slowly falling apart. I remember reading a study on emotional labor that said something simple but powerful. Burnout doesn't happen because people care too much. It happens because caring becomes one-sided for too long. That's what you were feeling, not a lack of love, an imbalance of it. Think about how your body responded when you finally chose yourself. The guilt came first, then the fear, And underneath both of those, a quiet relief you didn't know how to trust. That relief matters. It's your nervous system recognizing safety without self-erasure. You might still hear the old accusations in your head. You're changing. You're distant. You don't care like you used to. But ask yourself something honest. Did you stop caring? Or did you stop bleeding? Because there's a difference between being open and being unprotected, between generosity and depletion, between love and survival. You don't need to convince anyone of this. The need to explain fades as your self-trust grows. I've seen this pattern repeat in so many lives. When someone stops abandoning themselves, the world tests them, not to punish them, but to see if they'll come back to the old role. And every time you stay grounded, something inside you rewires. Your body learns that connection doesn't have to cost you everything. Your mind learns that boundaries don't end love. They clarify it. Some relationships will soften and deepen because of this. They will feel safer, slower, more real. Others will drift, not because you failed, but because they were built on a version of you that no longer exists. Let that be okay. You are not responsible for maintaining dynamics that required your silence. You are responsible for being honest with yourself. Self-love is not loud. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up in small, consistent choices. Pausing before you agree. Leaving when your body says enough. Choosing rest without justification. Over time, those choices change your life in ways you can't immediately see. You become less reactive, more present, less resentful, more peaceful. And the people who belong in your life feel the difference. They don't compete with your boundaries. They respect them. So the next time guilt whispers that you're selfish, listen closely. That voice is old. It learned to protect you when love felt conditional. Thank it for getting you here. Then choose differently. You are not selfish for choosing yourself. You are finally treating yourself the way you've always treated others. With care.